Here's a quick tutorial on how to build a CRUD tool on top of a database. Let's go ahead and open the component drawer and grab a table component. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the width of this a bit. And then let's go ahead and decide what data I'm displaying here. So I'm going to specify my database. In this example, I'm going to use a Postgres database. And then I'm going to choose a function. Now, functions are internal's data layer. For SQL databases, you can think of them as SQL queries in the background. And you'll notice that there are a bunch of different functions in here. They're list, delete, get, insert, update. Now, these are functions that internal auto-generated for me. Usually when you connect a database, we'll just go ahead and auto-generate a bunch of different functions so that you can get started very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and build with those. So let's look for one that's called list user accounts. So this is pulling data from my user accounts table in my Postgres database. And now let's go ahead and add a button to edit the data. I'm going to add a pop-up form inline. Now, one thing to note, I'm doing this inline. You can also drag in a form. You can always place it to the right of the table. You can put a button on the top right. There are many ways to do this. Now let's configure the form. So when I click on this, it's going to open up a pop-up form, and I'm going to choose what it's going to allow me to edit. So let's go ahead and edit something in my Postgres database, and I'm going to look for the update user accounts function. This allows me to update the records that are in the user accounts table in my Postgres database. And let's go ahead and configure this form. I'm going to call this edit user info. I'm going to get rid of the text here and just use an icon. Let's go ahead and use a link icon. And let's go back to the form. I'm going to skip the instructions and I'm going to add fields to edit. Now I can add all these different fields. Just for this example, I'm going to keep it simple and allow email, first name, last name to be edited. And I'll go ahead and also add in the updated at, which I'm going to update on from the form, and the company ID. So I have a bunch of different fields here. Right now, if I were to save this and take a look, if I click on the button, it's just going to show me a form with blank fields. Now, obviously, that's not going to work for me since I'm trying to create an editing experience. So let's go ahead and configure the form. So the ID field I'm going to have hidden so the user does not need to see the ID, but I need to pass in the actual ID of the record that's being edited. So let's go ahead and grab a value from a component and use the table rows ID and pull it in. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at email. I'm going to allow the user to edit the field, but I'm going to pre-fill the field with the table rows email. Same thing with first name. Let's go ahead and pre-fill the rows first name. Last name, again, I'm going to pre-fill the last name. For the updated at field, I'm going to have this be hidden, but I'm going to go ahead and set the updated at to the date and time the button is clicked. And the last one is company ID. Now, company ID, ideally I want this to be a drop down of company names that are available in my companies table, since I don't expect my users to remember any kind of company ID when they're trying to edit this. So let's go ahead and change this to a drop down. Now, if I only have a few drop down values, I can specify my drop down values manually right here. But in my example, I have a lot more companies in my database, and so I'm going to go ahead and click Configure dropdown here, jump into Deeper Configurations, and then uncheck this button and specify a source for my dropdown. So my dropdown is essentially going to be powered by another function. And the function is going to be from Postgres, and I'm going to use the list companies function. Now with a dropdown, I can specify a display name and the actual value that's going to be passed through. So in my example, I want the user to see the company name. But when a user selects a company name, I want to pass in the company ID. So we'll go ahead and configure that. Now let's go back to my form. I need to do one last thing. Go back into my company ID field, and let's go ahead and pre-fill the existing value. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the rows company ID. Okay, so my editing button is done. Next thing I'll do is create a quick create form. Let's go ahead and choose the pop-up form again. And I'll specify my data source. So I'm going to edit or add a record into my Postgres database. And I'm going to look for my insert user function. Let's go ahead and change the button a bit. Let's say new user. And I can add a bunch of different fields for my particular form. I'm just going to add all of these. And of course, I could configure each one of these fields again. I could pre-populate, I can set default values, I can create drop-downs, radio buttons, etc. Now, the last thing that I will do is add a quick delete button. Now, I could choose a regular button if you just want to delete immediately. I would think that it might be safer to use a pop-up form so that you can confirm the delete. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to specify a data source again. So let's go ahead and choose Postgres. And let's look for the delete user accounts function. I'm going to remove the text and add a delete icon. Let's make this a link and red as well. I need to pass in an ID so that I know what record I'm deleting. I'm going to go ahead and hide this and grab the record ID from the row. And I'm just going to add some quick instructions here. Are you sure you want to delete this record? All right, one last thing. I'm just going to move the delete button to be on the far right. All right. Now I am all set here. One thing that I do want to show you before we save this and take a look at the tool. Now I built all of this using auto-generated functions. Of course, you may want to create custom functions and write your own SQL. Maybe you want this table to join a bunch of different tables in your database. Or you want a button to edit, multiple different tables or do something else special. In those cases, you'll simply go to the app data section, look for your data source, so my Postgres database, and create a custom function. So here's like a quick example of that. Now, once you create your custom function, you can easily build with it here. It's the custom function will just show up in the same list of functions that you have for your data source. Now let's go ahead and publish this and take a look at the tool. So here is my simple CRUD tool. I have an edit icon here that lets me edit the data. Let's go ahead and maybe change the company. And this button allows me to add a new user. And this button allows me to delete a record. And that's it. Thanks for watching.